So when God decided to have a son, he did. This is the omnipresent God. The omnipresent God had a son, giving him not the same elements in himself, but those elements that will lead him eventually to the light in knowing that allows him to know everything. We know this as our own intellectual wisdom that leads us to the greater knowing and truth in a logic, that light and logic that we find that concludes the truth knowing, in which we search through our wisdom. Our intellect joins with wisdom, searches through our emotional memories to try and understand the moment in the now. And it's through those emotional memories, that emotional knowledge base of self, that everything is understood. People who try to understand things cognitively by excluding the emotional part are spiritually dead inside, because it takes the acknowledgement of human emotion to feel alive spiritually. Anyway, the Son of God didn't know he had a father. He didn't know there was a Lord above him. So he thought he was the only Lord. He and his feminine element both calculated the thought of us, humans, their children. So they worked through it, and then he stopped working through it with his own wisdom. He left the wisdom, his own wisdom, to see if he's gotten everything right cognitively. And in Godland, because there are two separate gods in one God, male and female, masculine and feminine, they resolve themselves in male and female gods, husband and wife, mother and father. Now, Sophia, the name of his sacred feminine element, was felt abandoned, and she was mad at God for leaving her. So Sophia decided to create a baby on her own without the masculine element giving his part. So all this baby God had was the feminine element of the mother God, and nothing of the masculine element of the father God. So the little baby God that she gave birth to was incomplete. His incompleteness was to be the God for the humans. He's the one who made humans. It wasn't the Son of God. It was his son. It was the son of the God. So, because he was incomplete, long time later, this God was cut off, and the complete God took over from being the influence. That's the whole trip for God, is to be our influence. Influence is in truth and logic, and intellect and wisdom. Truth being with the emotional response automatically. So, and here we are. So this God was cut off from being our influence. But then the intelligent animal came, saw the human condition, and made their own humans. That's us, white people. White people are the genetic manipulations of the original humans made by this incomplete God, in which his father and mother are taking over as being our influences for him until he completes himself. Because of the first separation in the Son of God, it duplicated itself in humankind, being separated from our intellectual wisdom. But there's a thing that happened to us because of its interference, its interception by the intelligent animal. It decided that it was going to be the influence in opposite of life, influence in opposite of truth and joy, and that's lies, deception, fear. It's fear of loss, the speaking image, and the things that we lust after. That lust fuel comes from this opposite influence. And in order to save human beings, the omnipresent God and his Son decided that we we were going to learn, grow, and evolve into our apprenticeship papers. We are direct descendants of what happened in Godland. That means we have the potential of becoming just like them, which is different from other life forms in the universe. They can't become like the gods that made them. We can, though. We have that gift. But we have to earn our apprenticeship papers and then walk through the apprenticeship of becoming a God self again, because we were separated in early childhood, in which the evil spirit influences fear of truth, fear of its emotional response, fear of self-expression of that emotional response, fear of telling the truth. So it in turn in early childhood tells us that we are to be afraid of the truth because it brings pain when the child expresses for the first time and is rejected for it. So the ego comes in, the masculine element of the evil spirit influence comes in to speak things of fear, the dark feminine element of the evil spirit influence inside people. And what it has one dark emotion, and it's fear. Fear of what, though? Fear of all of our emotional responses. In that way, it keeps us imprisoned, unwilling to tell the truth anymore, because, we think to ourselves, if I self-express and tell my truth, along with its emotional response, we're going to feel rejected. And if I feel rejected, then I'm going to acknowledge myself that I am low self-worth, and that's terrible, a terrible thing for anybody to do. So we avoid it. And in that avoidance, we empty ourselves of the natural need-meeting sense of spiritual fullness we receive from God and His Son when we complete a truth. And that's completing the emotional truth of the self first, then the cognitive stuff, but it all gets transferred through the emotional filters that we have. Now that emotional response in our reaction to it goes one of two ways: through life or through the death of emotional life, resulting in the evil that we see in the world. Because what happens when we are with unresolved pain? We get mad. When we get angry, we start calculating heart's thought with anger, and no longer with the good, like the good of empathy and caring and understanding, that stuff. Instead, we get mad and we start fighting with each other, and that eventually ends up into the violence that we see in the world today. But before that, it destroys our relationships in our families, in our friendships, at our workplace, in the community, and just continues. It has been continuing. This is the last life cycle for us to make it. I think we're all the leftovers from the other 4 life cycles, who others have made it off this kindergarten planet of grade 1. We need to get into grade 2, but all we need to do is learn ourselves again. And then we're invited. Letting the person off the hook versus forgiveness. Forgiveness, as if. I haven't met anybody who was able to forgive the pain that others have caused that person. Me included, I don't know. You know what I did do, though? I did let the people who hurt me off the hook. I told them, look, you're off the hook for any pain you caused me. I'm not forgiving you because I'm not forgiving you. That's it. If I can, I can. If I can't, I can't. I don't care if I can or can't. I'm not forgiving you because that's just real for me. I don't know how it is for you and how you do things, but I don't forgive. But I can let go. I mean, let the person off the hook for the harm they've caused. So what does that do? It separates me from blaming that person, and that separates me from that hurt associated with that person. Now the pain is mine. Now I got to deal with it. And no longer blaming, because blaming, I swear to God, is an infection on the infection. Meaning you're already infected with dark spirit. We all are. We're all infected with dark spiritual stuff inside of us that makes us go stupid and hurtful and evil. But blaming and justification, things like that, that's another infection that keeps the open wound open and oozing. So now we're not calculating our heart's thought that Oh, this fucking guy did that, that person did this, I'm gonna go get... That kind of thing, that kind of darkness in your... is not there for you to do something. It's there to distract you and confuse you and keep you away from calculating heart's thought with the good. Like meditation, that's occupying your mind and heart's thought. So is being angry at someone. It's occupying your mind and heart's thought. What you want in your moment inside your heart's thought is up to you. If you allow the anger, if you allow the hurt, if you allow the blaming, the justification for your own darkness, what happens in reality is this darkness is being processed inside both cognitive thought process and heart's thought process. They're two at first, but become one when self, if human will, self-expresses and wants to, but remains separated when we're confused like that. And that's the goal of the evil spirit influence, just to keep it separated. It doesn't want to convince us of nothing, doesn't want to get us to do anything. It just wants us separated, so we're not then, therefore, being with the thought of God, the thought of truth and movement, the real word of truth. I'm sorry, the real word of God is what silence speaks to us. This written word, it's what silence speaks to self. That's exactly what's in the keys of knowledge from Jesus. It's nothing else. Depending on an outside anything as your God or God worship, anything, it doesn't matter what it is, and there's so many things. But it's all fake. There's no such thing as a God outside yourself. There's just intelligent animals. That's it. We're intelligent animals, along with the intelligent animal who's hacking the living computer. It's not a God. It's just smart beings. Just like when we evolved. You know how we got smarter from the 1900s, and now we're like geniuses? I forgot my point. Oh, we're still not gods, but to them back then, we're smarter than them, right? So in that sense, we appear to be something that we're not, but just more intelligent. That's what this guy has done. That's what this intelligent animal has done. Intercepted humanity. Community needs, everybody's needs met. Otherwise, we live in Darwinian God worship, where just a few gets their needs met and the rest of us starve to death.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice. But we think the price is worth it.
Promise me that no innocents get killed on your watch. You know I can't do that.
You're clueless about or just don't want to remember the 1993 attack by the federal government on the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, that resulted in the killing of 76 people, including children.
Well, then promise me that we will win in the end.
It changes us from the inside out.
We have discriminated against Indigenous children for generations, for decades, for centuries.
Dozens of isolated Indigenous communities in Canada have recently declared states of emergency due to suicide epidemics, unclean water, and a lack of adequate infrastructure. Amid these crises, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a historic visit to Shoal Lake 40, one of the First Nations reserves without clean water and stranded by a broken-down ferry. Trudeau spent several hours with residents here, just one part of an upcoming Viceland documentary on issues plaguing Indigenous communities. Late in the day, he spoke to Vice News about the government's complex relationship with First Nations and what his new Liberal government says they're doing next.
Mr. Trudeau, thank you for joining us. We're here in Shoal Lake 40, and in the recent weeks, the national conversation has turned towards communities like Shoal Lake 40, but also like Attawapiskat and Cross Lake that are enduring and suffering through these crises of youth suicide. And your federal budget has been criticized for underfunding child welfare. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found that our spending in Canada actually discriminates against Indigenous children. So as you've accepted this role as Prime Minister and as you've had this visit today, do you agree with that? Do we discriminate through funding against Indigenous children?
We have discriminated against Indigenous children for generations, for decades, for centuries. And that's why this budget put forward $8.6 billion, never before seen levels of funding for Indigenous communities. And is it enough? No, it's not. And is it going to fix everything overnight? Absolutely not. We have an awful lot of work to do in the coming years, in the coming decades.
For the kids we've met today, I mean, what can they expect, like, for the rest of their teenage years and adult lives? Is it going to be their kids that are going to see these changes, their grandkids? What can be promised?
If their kids are going to do well, it'll be because we helped these kids now, who will have a better experience as parents as their parents were able to have, just because so many childhood experiences or parental modeling were stolen in the residential school.
There's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is like a little mini factory.
So listening to these kids, I was asking them what they need. One of the girls said, look, we need more counselors. We need more people we can talk to who will understand us. We need more after-school activities so that we have things to do in the afternoons, in the evenings. Not crazy demands, not things that are beyond what any kid in this country should be able to expect. And these are the things we need to work on.
So here in Shoal Lake 40, where we are right now, there's no access to clean water. You yourself were out in the community delivering bottled water, and the last time we spoke, you made a promise to rectify this issue not just in Shoal Lake 40, but across the country within 5 years. Yeah. Your new budget is committed, I believe, $1.8 billion towards that. Estimates say the whole problem is going to take about $5 billion to fix, with $1.2 up front. All these numbers are great to hear, but what can we expect substantially in the next little while? Like, what successes are imminent for this problem?
Investments in infrastructure, investments in actually getting moving on the kinds of things, projects in many cases that communities have had on the books, solutions that they've had there for a long time that there hasn't been funding for.
That I stake my life on.
Why the hell is this thing worth anything? First, you need to know that in reality, it's not just a Federal Reserve note. It's not just a dollar. It's a petrodollar. So here's a short history lesson you really need to know. In 1944, a war-weary world convened in the Bretton Woods Conference. 44 allied nations from across the globe met to discuss the future of the new economic world. From this meeting came an arrangement to establish the US dollar, which was then the strongest currency, as the global currency, which would also be backed by gold. You can kind of think of it as an insurance policy for the financially ruined nations at the time. From the Bretton Woods Conference also came what would eventually evolve into the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization. All is right with the world for a few years, but then the 1960s hit. The U.S. gold-backed monetary system begins to cripple the American economy. The pegged fixed rate of dollar to gold first created a false demand for the U.S. dollar, which eventually could no longer be backed in gold. Countries grew suspicious. Then we got involved in the Vietnam War, and our deficit was realized by the world in late 1971. That deficit being about $200 billion. Countries began asking for their gold, but the U.S. simply no longer had it. What was once a nation that held 80% of the world's gold now had almost none. So the president at that time had to act, and act quickly. So the United States makes history again in 1971. On August 15, 1971, the U.S. president at that time, Richard Nixon, delivers a speech to the world.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
There would no longer be a gold-backed U.S. currency. World currencies now floated on the market, ending the Bretton Woods Agreement. Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State, assists in the deal breaker. In 1973, to maintain a demand on a global scale for the U.S. dollar, similar to that of the Woods Agreement, a deal is struck with Saudi Arabia. Oil for dollars became the new world economy. The petrodollar system is born.
That's my cue.
The petrodollar deal between Saudi Arabia and the United States is this. And take special note of this because it's the basis of today's American foreign policy in the Middle East. For every barrel of oil purchased from Saudi Arabia, from any nation, the oil would have to be purchased in US dollars only. For those who have foreign currency, they would first have to convert to US dollars before being able to purchase the oil. Every growing economy operates on oil, so they needed US dollars. But the exchange for such a lucrative deal comes at a cost that we still pay for. For Saudi Arabia to agree to the exclusive oil for dollars deal, the US promised weapons and military protection. For excess profits made from oil, Saudi Arabia would buy US debt. And that's what you have in your pocket. That Federal Reserve note is a note of debt. So in short, the United States was to protect Saudi borders, which is oil, at all costs necessary. Now for some kickers. In 1975, OPEC arrives. Multiple nations agree on the oil for dollars deal with similar U.S. military and weapons protection exchanges. But some years after the arrangement, several nations begin to question the validity of such a deal, much like what happened with the gold for dollars deal of Bretton Woods. Nations like North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Venezuela decide to exit or not take part in the deal. This is also during a time when Russia, China, and India turned their backs on the petrodollar system. Iran's sanctions commenced in 1979. Remember Syria? They made it to a similar list in 1979 by that same U.S. department. Terms are coined like axis of evil, a corporate mainstream media favorite.
You were just the last piece of an inevitable outcome. This is not your fault.
If you want to keep fighting, you have all of us at your back.
We think the price is worth it. We think the price is worth it.
People got hurt today. Promise me that no innocents get killed on your watch.
You know I can't do that.
Well, then promise me that we will win in the end.
That I stake my life on.
Don't scream phrases into a megaphone that you borrowed from another person's research. And don't proclaim yourself an original thinker because you belong to a group that represents an unpopular belief. Those are all examples of the other side of the coin of groupthink, leading a false rebellion. False rebellion is dangerous because it gives the illusion that you are free and thinking for yourself. A true rebellion, a true revolution, begins when you quit following and start leading. And those who end up following you should be taught by you to quit following you and start leading. And the only way to lead successfully is by fully understanding your rights as a human being on this planet. The true history of this planet has been stifled from the top down. Since the inception of monotheism and the ridicule as well as outlaw in specific cultures of all pagan religions and practices, a lie has been forced upon all civilizations. You have to wonder why powerful empires were threatened enough by paganism to make the practice of such religions punishable by death. This threat didn't end during the Roman Empire. Take a look at how the founders of America, by mandate of Great Britain, wiped out Native American tribes indiscriminately. Great Britain has also shown some of the most brutal forms of genocide in Africa, India, New Zealand, New Guinea, and many other locations in which pagan tribes still existed. East Timor suffered from one of the most brutal genocides in all of history and was fueled by the United Nations and the United States funding during the Carter administration.
Ford and Kissinger visited Jakarta, I think it was December 5th. We know that they had requested that Indonesia delay the invasion until after they left because it would be too embarrassing.
Esquisitos livres, cara ou dreta, My master points out that men don't need nipples.
And within hours, I think, after they left, the invasion took place on December 7th.
What happened on December 7th in 1975 is just one of the great evil deeds of history. Early in the morning, bombs began dropping on Dili. The number of troops that invaded Dili that day almost outnumbered the entire population of the town. And for 2 or 3 weeks, they just killed people. So the Timorese were fleeing into the jungles by the thousands. By late 1977-78, Indonesia set up receiving centers for those Timorese who came out of the jungle waving white flags. Those the Indonesians thought were more educated or who were suspected of belonging to Frelimo or other opposition parties were immediately killed. They took women aside and flew them off to Dili in helicopters for use by the Indonesian soldiers. They killed children and babies. But in those days, their main strategy and their main weapon was starvation.
By 1978, it was approaching really genocidal levels. The church and other sources estimated about 200,000 people killed. The U.S. backed it all the way. The U.S. provided 90% of the arms. Right after the invasion, arms shipments were stepped up. When the Indonesians actually began to run out of arms in 1978, the Carter administration moved in and increased arms sales. And other Western countries did the same. Canada, England, Holland, and everybody who could make a buck was in there trying to make sure they could kill more Timorese.
The last thing that the ones in power want is a sovereign group or tribe setting a positive example for others. Understand that it is not a fight to be fought.